Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, we appreciate your time. In this episode, I will be looking at Turkey's push for influence in Africa is working very well so far, while Ankara's many-sided approach to cooperation with Africa is bearing fruit. In this episode, I will be looking at three specific areas. First, the Turkish government has made Africa one of its first foreign policy priorities. The second thing I will be looking at here will be trade and cooperations between Turkey and African countries are booming so far. The third thing I will be looking at will be these ties. These strong ties, so to point out, could eventually clash with Western strategy in the continent of Africa. If you like what you're about to see, I will encourage you to smash the like button and share the video to encourage our channel, as we're going to be going deep into research regards to strategic engagement on how Africa engage strategic partners from around the world. After rapprochement with Europe, followed by an inconclusive attempt to join the European Union in the 1990s and early 2000s, Turkey shifted its focus to Africa. At first, this pivot was motivated by the need to secure more diplomatic backings in international setting. Around 2005, however, Turkey-African relations began to deepen. This growth was spurred by global geopolitics, but also by the determined approach of the Justice and Development Party and Turkey's economic boom in the mid-2000s. This engagement with Africa initially relied on soft power, humanitarian aid, education, and also cultural initiatives. Over time, more assertive forms of influence have become key aspects of the partnership. For example, in 2001, Turkey played a vital role in Somalia by delivering aid during the devastating famine. In 2017, established Camp Tukson in Mogadishu, its largest overseas military training facility, and in 2019, Turkey intervened in Libya's civil war by supporting the Tripoli administration against General Khalifa Haftar, backed by Egypt and Russia at the time. If you look at geostrategic importance here, Turkey as an alternative to Western and China, to look at other aspects including other geopolitical partners of the continent of Africa. Turkey's African relations have expanded rapidly because of Ankara's ambition and multifaceted long-term strategy. To expand its influence, Turkey has been engaging with a wide array of actors, including government bodies, private sector firms, and also faith-based groups. It has intensified its former diplomatic effort. There are now 44 Turkish embassies in Africa, compared to 12 in 2002. Ankara has also launched cultural programs, business councils, and extensive flight networks across the continent of Africa, with Turkish airlines now flying to more than 60 African destinations. Accompanying this strategy is a narrative portraying Turkey as an Afro-Eurasian state. President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has shaped a modern vision of Turkey that revives its Ottoman heritage while championing Turkish nationalism. He has consistently advocated for the overflow and the overhaul of global institutions, positioning these countries not just as a supporter of African aspiration, but also a viable alternative to the traditional powers like China and Western countries. If you look at other strategic options like Beijing, Ankara emphasized state sovereignty and refrained from imposing political conditions on its partners. In context, Turkey's Muslim identity and lack of colonial history are seen as unique strength. For African countries, the Turkish aid model is also advantageous. Although funding is limited, the fact that grants are negotiated under bilateral scheme makes it an appealing alternative to aid from international institutions that come with hefty political demands. If you look at geostrategic relationship, Turkey became a major security player in the continent of Africa. Historically, Turkey's influence was mostly limited to North Africa and the Horn of Africa because of the geographic and also more importantly religious connection. However, as previously anticipated, Ankara is now expanding and consolidating relations with countries in West Africa like Nigeria and Senegal, and including Sahel countries as well. In the last 2 decades, trade between Turkey and Africa has increased from $5.4 billion to over $40 billion as of 2022 figures. Turkish products and services, from consumers to cultural goods, pharmaceuticals, and also products and constructive services, have been making significant intrusion and inroad into African markets thanks to their own particular preservation and looking at other competitive pricing brought by those particular products in the continent of Africa. Additionally, Turkey has become a key actor in Africa's changing security landscape. Already an important presence in North Africa and the Horn of Africa, Ankara has concluded defense agreement with countries in West and East Africa, including Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda. You name the rest. Although the specifics of the deals vary, ranging from security provisions and technical support to military training, they most often include provisions and also around arms sales. If we look at other strategic relationships with regards to Turkey in the region, the expansion of Turkish defense industry is one of the priorities of President Erdogan's government. In 2023, the volume of Turkish defense and aerospace export grew by 27%, reaching a record high of $5.5 billion according to figures. Growth is expected to accelerate into 2025, now that the Turkish companies Bayraktar Technology has signed the biggest defense contract in the country's history for the sale of unmanned combat area vehicles to Saudi Arabia. Turkey has become an important player in the global drone industry thanks to the development of the competitive model like the Bayraktar TB2 or the Akinci. For African countries, Turkish defense products have many upsides. They are affordable and also technically reliable, having been tested in Libya, Syria, and more recently in Ukraine. Again, unlike the Western countries, Turkey does not make this assistance conditional on governance or human rights commitment. For countries facing insurgent movement with under-resourced armies and also porous borders, like the countries across the West African regions like Togo, Niger, and also including Somalia, Turkey's drones and counter-terrorism expertise are especially valuable. Another sign of Ankara's increasing importance in African security landscape is the new maritime initiative in the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden, including partnerships with Somalia, Sudan, and also Eritrea. This is what I perceive with regards to Turkish engagement in the continent of Africa at the moment. If you look at perspective, according to my own perspective, looking at my different scenarios, the fragmentation world order is making it increasingly difficult for the European Union to design a coherent African policy, and the United States of America initiatives on the continent have mostly failed. This situation will likely bring Turkey and African countries closer. If you look how the United States of America has been kicked out from the country of Niger, and its drone base in the city of Agadez was dismantled, and France being humbled in the continent of Africa, especially in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, as the French president at the time violated, according to experts, the Vienna Convention, refusing the French ambassador to leave the country. The most likely Turkey scenario and Africa outcome that I see in this particular narrative will be that, given the scope of interest involved, including geopolitical concern, economic interest, and the trade dynamics, relations with Africa are expected to remain a priority for Turkey, even if a new leader were to take over in Turkey, not expected in the short term. For African countries, relations with Ankara will continue to offer an opportunity to increase their own leverage, access economic and trade benefits, and also secure defense agreement. The most likely scenario is therefore one under which security cooperation drives the expansion of Turkish African relations as more African countries resort to Turkish defense equipment and expertise. Ankara is expected to become an important and in some cases decisive actor in Africa's security landscape. If you look at perspective here, as we continue to dive and closing this episode, Turkey has recently grown closer to Egypt, mostly because of its covering position on the conflict in Sudan and in Gaza. Ankara is also skillfully navigating relations with both Morocco and Algeria, two regional rivals. In the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, Turkey is perceived as the less problematic than Moscow, and also according to Russia's own engagement in the region, based on other Western experts who perceive Russia taking over the western part of the continent of Africa. However, these nations need geopolitical partners that can provide them the cover, the technology, the support that they need, and they have seen the country of Russia to be that alternative. All of this suggests that Turkey will remain a strategic partner in the continent of Africa moving forward. The above could also lead to two different outcomes in middle and large powers competition in the continent of Africa. The less likely scenario that I see here, the West and Turkey align their approach to Africa. The first less likely part is convergence between the approaches of Turkey, the European Union, and the United States of America. This could play out through multilateral arrangement and engagement. So to point out, for example, the NATO framework, a more cohesive strategy on Africa from those major players will be potentially beneficial in all aspects. However, with convergence is possible. How Turkey engages with Africa, including its stance on various conflicts across the continent of Africa, will ultimately hinge on Ankara's global interest and a middle power striving to manage the complexity of an increasingly divided international order. More likely scenario that I see, Turkey and the West compete for influence in the continent of Africa. Recent events, however, suggest that the more likely part with the Western countries is divergence. In Niger, while the European Union and the United States of America have suspended aid to military governments in the country, Turkey, which is interested in establishing military bases in the country, has maintained its support for the new government. President Erdoğan has stated that the Economic Community of West African States' intention is to intervene in the country was unacceptable at the time when Nigeria was pushing, according to ECOWAS' engagement, to intervene in the country of Niger. Ankara has also positioned itself as a mediator in the Sudan conflict. President Erdoğan received Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, leader of the Sudan Armed Forces, in Ankara last September for official talks on bilateral relationship. If you look at Turkey's strategic engagement in the continent of Africa, though smooth but very complex, with the number of embassies increasing and the United States of America at the moment declining its role in the continent of Africa and France bowing out of the continent of Africa, new players like Turkey and emerging powers will continue to engage the continent of Africa, as we all see. At this moment, African countries are choosing their geopolitical partners carefully because the continent of Africa has risen and is selecting its partner. Turkey will continue to play a role in the continent of Africa irrespective of what its Western partners think. I want to thank you for watching. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think in regards to Turkish engagement in the continent of Africa. Why do you think some African countries have gone closer to the country of Turkey? And at the moment, we all shall be looking how the geopolitical environment has shifted as the United States of America at the moment is very complacent in terms of international role. For now, I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.